Hello. So, my research topic that I have been studying throughout this semester has been that of handwritten versus typed note-taking and resulting memory retention and recall. So, this is something that I wanted to specifically focus on as I get into my college career and I continued in through lectures and lessons that I need to know the information of for my career. And so I really was curious as to whether there is a difference when students handwrite their notes versus typed their notes and if that has any effect on the cognitive processing that happens throughout a lecture. So the purpose of my study is essentially to show that as technology is ever changing and ever evolving, if there is anything that we can do as students to better interact with that technology, or if technology is harming students in any way. So I wanted to examine how note-taking format affects the different areas of learning, such as that long-term memory retention, depth of processing, and recall on tests. And um, I also wanted to pursue this as there has been a lot of studies on different types of note taking and how that affects memory retention and different cognitive abilities. However, a lot of the studies have varying results. And so it is unclear which method would be best in supporting memory retention and recall. I pursued this topic specifically because as reliance on technology is becoming greater and greater in our society, I wanted to see if there is any way we can persuade against technology in the educational setting, or if it truly is advancing our education before we know it. I also personally find that for myself, handwritten note taking is better for me. I know that it supports my own learning style a bit better and that I am able to remember the things that I am being taught when I handwrite it a little more than when I type it, along with getting less distracted. So I just wanted to see if there is any relationship between the two or if it's more of a correlational relationship rather than a causational relationship. So these are my three research questions as followed. Number one, to what extent does handwritten note-taking impact long-term memory retention compared to typed note-taking? Number two, how does the type of note-taking, handwritten or typed, influence the depth of processing during a lesson? And number three, what is the relationship between the type of note-taking and recall performance later on? So all of these research questions focus on the main cause of different note-taking styles and how that affects the student's processing throughout a lecture, throughout a lesson. Um, and specifically, I really wanted to focus on that memory retention as I feel like I have personally struggled throughout schooling of being able to recall information that I was taught in many courses past. So I wanted to see if there is any potential connection between different types of note taking and how long you are able to store that information for and recall it at will. So now let's get into my variables and into my study as a whole. So that dependent variable is going to be the memory retention and recall, as it is what is being affected by my independent variable, which is the note-taking method. So the way I wanted to execute this study is by having students that took all the students that took a course by the same professor take their notes or their test scores from that first semester, compare it, find matching pairs of students that performed similarly throughout the entire semester, and then go into semester two by splitting those matching pairs up into two separate groups, one group that will take handwritten notes and one group that will take typed notes. Um, I wanted to do this in order to see if there are any changes between the test scores between semester one and semester two, whether the students that were performing similarly and on par with each other in semester one, whether there's a great distance between the two students' performances in that second semester when they are using the assigned note-taking method. Um, There are a few compounding variables to consider in this, which is that prior academic ability, which means that maybe one student is just naturally more gifted in the subject than another, so it's not a fair trade between the two matched pairs. Another thing would be those study habits outside of class. So if a student is taking all handwritten notes in class, but then they go home and type it all up themselves, that could be a confounding variable. And then also there's the issue of students handwriting their notes, but it's on tablets. And I'm in this experiment that was not accounted for, so we're just going to assume that they are not allowed to type on tablets, but that is something that needs to be considered if this were to go into a big experiment. All right, so let's get into the participants. All of the participants are going to be, like I mentioned, students that are taking the same course taught under the same teacher. So that would be like all of the students at Norcross High School taking American Government with Mr. Edwards. So um, they would be recruited at the beginning of the first semester. They would be asked if they would like to participate in a research study. They have full authority to opt in or opt out. It would not affect their grade. There would be no added bonus to opting in. It's truly up to the student themselves. And then those who did opt in would receive their own informed consent letter, as well as their parents who would receive an informed consent letter, as we are dealing with high school students in the study. Um, and then they would get a general like parameter of the study so that they know what to expect going into that second semester when they are going to be switching up their note-taking method. I would expect that this sample size would be about 50 students. We would hope for it to be more, but you have to consider that a lot of students might not opt into the study. And if we're going with a smaller school, we might not even have that many students in the same course to be able to pull from in the first place. All right, let's get into that research setting. So it is going to be an experimental research. We are going to be manipulating the variables by having those students in their two different groups. And it's going to take place within the school setting. So there should be nothing to be done outside of school by these students, which is why that outside study methods could be a confounding variable in this experiment. But we're just going to be studying how they take their notes in class while the teacher is teaching to them actively. It will also be using a factorial design as there are two independent variables, the handwritten independent variable and the typed independent variable. And it's also going to be utilizing those matched pairings between students who performed similarly first semester into the second semester. All right, now let's get into the method, which I've gotten into a little bit already, but we want to specifically highlight how it is a quantitative research design, how the data that we get from this research is going to be taken straight from the results of a student's test. It's not going to be based off of surveys or questionnaires. It is going to be that data straight from the test scores. So those exam scores are going to be analyzed and utilized to show any differences between the test taking, the te note taking methods and their test scores. And like I said, the students that have the similar scores across the first semester are going to be paired with each other. And then going into the second semester, that is when those comparisons will be made after each test, whether one student that was in the typed group performed better or if the student that was in the handwritten group performed better, and if that carries on throughout the entire semester. So I chose to use the matched pair method because in my mind, I just see that as the easiest way to get two real students who perform similarly and clearly have a similar style of retaining the information and a similar memory retention to compare them when they are made to work in their assigned note-taking group. So I just assumed that it would be the best way to see the true comparison between a handwritten note taker and a typed note taker without it being an individualized study and having like one singular student spend one semester handwriting versus one semester typing, as that could be a lot more up in the air as to what the result is because it might just, there's a lot more factors that could complicate that study versus having a large sample size of students that are all working towards the same goal in the same time period. So there are a few ethical considerations that we have to take into account when it comes to this study. Mainly, it is going to be that one group may benefit more from the specific note-taking method, and we do not want this study to harmfully impact any students' grades at all. So if students did see that they are scoring lower on tests due to their assigned note-taking method, we would allow them to drop the study at any time and go back to completing their schoolwork in any way that suits them best. There is also the issue of confidentiality and privacy. We want to make sure that the teacher is not informed of which students are in which group, and we want to make sure that the teacher is not, or like anyone else is not knowing who their matched pair is or anything like that. So we would only identify students using their student ID number, and that would only be available to the research workers. All right, so let's talk about the final discussion, specifically starting with the role in literature. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there have been a few studies done on this topic already. However, the findings have been very mixed. They have not been very concise, and it showcases many different answers as to whether handwritten or typed note-taking is best for the student. So this would hopefully help clarify the mixed findings. It would also examine note-taking within a real classroom, which I have not found many studies that did. So that would be a good perk of this. And then it also will help connect that note-taking to the cognitive functions by utilizing those test scores. It's important. So its importance is because, as I said, technology is rapidly changing. And so the way that students are absorbing their information in class is also rapidly changing. And so it is important as educators to continuously move with the times. And if it is shown that type note taking may be best for students, then teachers need to embrace that. And if it is shown that handwritten note taking is best for students, then teachers may need to limit the use of technology in their classroom and go back to those handwritten methods that were done previously before technology exploded. It also is important for the students themselves. The results of this study can help students better choose their own note-taking method and if they want to adjust based on the findings of this study. If a student has always typed their notes on a Chromebook and then they see this study and see that handwritten note-taking far out sorry, far exceeds the results of type note taking, then they may be able to switch up their study methods and better help themselves remember and recall the information that they are learning in their classes. And then finally, it will provide guidance for the teachers. Like I mentioned in that first point, the teachers will be able to adjust their classroom style and their teaching style based on the results of this study. So my hypothesis, as I've been kind of hinting towards throughout this whole thing, is that handwritten note-taking will prove to be the most effective for memory retention and recall. I believe this just based on my own personal experience. I have always found that writing my notes personally helped me really lock it into my brain, and I feel like the motor skills that are required like really helps lock it in. Whereas with typing, there are a lot of distractions, there are a lot of things to get your mind off of the subject at hand. So that is why my hypothesis is that the handwritten note-taking will prove to be the most effective. And then finally, let's get into those limitations. So of course, I kind of hit on this with some of the ethical issues, but a few more limitations are going to be that this is only conducted within one course. So all of the students are under one course, one professor. So it might be necessary for this study to be repeated throughout multiple different schools, multiple different courses, different professors, different grade levels. So that is an important consideration to take in and one of the limitations of this specific study. Another limitation is that we cannot guarantee that students will be following their assigned note-taking methods. We are not going to be sitting in every single class. As I said, the teacher will not be aware of which student is in which assigned group. So if the student decides not to take their notes by hand and they are instead using a laptop, there is no way for us to truly guarantee that. And then it's also following their study methods at home. If they go home and decide to rewrite all of their type notes by hand or vice versa, then there's no way to truly tell which one is better benefiting the student. It's also important to note that the results may not be generalizable. As much as we try to get a large sample size, it is impossible to truly say that what works for one student will work for all students. So we're going to try to be as generalizable as possible, but it is not possible to be completely generalizable, especially when working in only one course with one professor. So that one subject might better yield for written note taking versus typed, but another subject might be better for typed versus handwritten or something like that. So it is important to remember that it will not be generalizable all the way. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, this was a great semester, and I'm very excited for you to read my final paper. Thank you so much.